What commenced as a tranquil morning in an Arlington parking lot would shortly be immortalized on body camera for global observation. Before we proceed, kindly indicate your global location of viewership in the comments and ensure you subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. Officer Nathan Reynolds had been a familiar presence patrolling Arlington's corporate parks for over a decade, and he prided himself on his ability to discern potentially problematic behavior before it escalated. However, Reynolds' professional history painted a more intricate picture. Internal documentation highlighted a pattern of stops involving young black men who had committed no infractions. These were minor oversights, such as parking slightly askew or carrying items that, in his judgment, seemed out of place. Complaints pertaining to racial bias had been lodged periodically, though none had resulted in significant repercussions. For him, suspicion was an innate faculty, and on that particular Tuesday morning, his body camera was recording as he surveyed a largely deserted parking area. Then he observed him, a black gentleman approaching one of the office structures, moving with an air of self-assurance, a federal ID conspicuously displayed around his neck. Marcus Bennett, aged 42, carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to drawing attention without demanding it. His objective today was a consultation at the premises of a nearby federal contractor, a routine assignment within an extensive day of training FBI and federal law enforcement personnel. His dark briefcase swayed gently by his side, his gaze steadily fixed on the path ahead, his disposition calm, almost unshakable. Reynolds' instincts immediately flagged Marcus as suspicious. His pre-existing biases surfaced before any dialogue commenced. Every step Marcus took toward the building seemed, to Reynolds, to validate his unspoken preconceptions. He maneuvered his patrol car into a diagonal position behind Marcus's parked vehicle, the subtle activation of his body camera marking the inception of what would soon become a widely circulated incident. "Pardon me, sir." Reynolds' voice cut sharply across the lot. Marcus paused, turned, and offered a courteous nod. "Good morning. How may I assist you?" Marcus inquired calmly, his tone measured and even. Reynolds' gaze intensified. The federal ID, glinting in the sunlight, struck him as almost defiant, a badge he deemed highly unlikely to be legitimate. "I require to see some identification," Reynolds demanded, advancing closer. His stance was rigid, almost confrontational, a consequence of years spent habitually assuming culpability in individuals resembling Marcus. Marcus reached into his wallet, presenting a driver's license alongside the federal ID. "This is my authorization. I'm here for a meeting at the contractor's office across the lot," Reynolds stated evenly. Reynolds' disbelief barely diminished. In his estimation, past encounters justified his distrust. "Are you quite certain that is genuine?" he inquired, gesturing vaguely toward the ID. The hand hovering over his radio betrayed his readiness to escalate the situation if necessary. From the periphery of the lot, a janitor trundled past with a cart, and a few employees glanced up from their coffee, sensing a palpable tension but uncertain of its source. The parking lot, which moments before had appeared ordinary, was now electric with a silent energy. Marcus remained unfazed. Years of rigorous training had equipped him to interpret body language, anticipate escalation, and maintain composure. "Officer," Marcus stated, raising a hand slightly as he took a step nearer. "Everything here is entirely legitimate. I am an FBI instructor. You are welcome to verify this with dispatch, should it be necessary." "Ash." His voice was calm, yet firm, a subtle assertion of authority that starkly contrasted with Reynolds' mounting unease. The camera's vantage point captured every nuance. Reynolds' jaw tightened, his eyes flickered toward the dispatcher's radio, his slight shift in weight indicating his contemplation of the ID's authenticity. Marcus's composure, the gleaming ID, the distant murmur of traffic, the sun's reflection off the mirrored office windows, all became integral elements of a silent, high-stakes confrontation. For Reynolds, this transcended a mere identification check. His prior conduct, unfounded assumptions, and repeated detentions of black men for trivial reasons were poised to collide with reality. And Marcus, the individual he had deemed suspicious, was someone few in local law enforcement would ever confront without facing repercussions. Each successive second amplified the tension. Reynolds' hand twitched toward the radio. Marcus's composed posture suggested he might have misjudged the situation. Nearby employees subtly redirected their gazes, some lifting their phones as instinctive witnesses to the unfolding events. What had begun as a tranquil morning stroll had already transformed into a scene charged with authority, prejudice, and the potential for disaster. And the body camera meticulously documented it all. The misread signals, the assumptions, the precise moment when perception threatened to eclipse reality. Even in these initial minutes, the clash of distinct worlds was evident. An officer whose career had been marked by questionable judgment, and a man whose professional life had been defined by authority, composure, and expertise. The confrontation had only just commenced. Reynolds' hand hovered near his radio, his fingers twitching, as if the mere gesture could somehow validate his suspicion. His voice, firm yet strained, broke the quietude of the Arlington parking lot. "Sir, I require you to remain precisely where you are. I will be verifying your credentials." Marcus Bennett tilted his head slightly, meeting Reynolds' gaze without animosity or apprehension. "Officer, I have already presented my identification. I am an FBI instructor en route to a meeting at the contractor's office across the lot. You may confirm this with your dispatcher." His tone was measured, even, and the faint resonance of his badge against his briefcase punctuated his words. However, Reynolds was not truly listening. Years of relying on intuition over verifiable facts had conditioned him to disregard explanations from individuals who did not conform to his narrow criteria. A black man possessing a federal badge seemed an impossibility, an improbability even in his perception. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I require backup. I have a suspicious individual, a black male, appearing to be in his mid-40s, attired in professional clothing, possibly in possession of a fraudulent federal ID, requesting immediate verification." The words hung suspended in the air, charged with tension as a nearby janitor halted his work in the middle of the lot, and a few employees looked up from their coffee cups. On the body camera feed, every detail was discernible. Marcus's calm stance, the slight squint of the officer's eyes against the sun, the glint of the identification. Marcus raised a hand, a subtle indication that he would not engage in unnecessary escalation. "Officer Reynolds, I understand you have a duty to perform, but I assure you everything I possess is legitimate. Kindly verify through dispatch. I am fully compliant." Reynolds' fingers tightened on the radio, his personal pride and ingrained biases colliding with Marcus's composed demeanor. Within minutes, 2 additional officers arrived, alighting cautiously from their patrol vehicle. Their body language conveyed a different tenor, less rigid, uncertain how to approach the developing situation. They exchanged glances between Reynolds and Marcus, who continued to stand tall and self-possessed. One of the responding officers, a younger patrolman named Davis, murmured, "Sir," he stated he's an FBI instructor. "Should we simply proceed with standard protocol?" Reynolds retorted sharply, "He is behaving suspiciously. I require verification first." His tone permitted no dissent. Yet the uncertainty evident in his eyes hinted at the slightest tremor of doubt beginning to surface. The camera meticulously recorded every subtle shift in expression. Marcus's fingers traced the edge of his ID calmly. He maintained consistent eye contact, occasionally glancing toward the dispatcher's microphone, subtly asserting his authority without raising his voice. Reynolds meanwhile shifted his weight from one foot to the other, exhibiting impatience and a defensive posture. Nearby employees began producing their mobile devices, sensing that something out of the ordinary was transpiring. A passing vehicle decelerated slightly, and the distant hum of traffic became an understated accompaniment to the mounting tension. The atmosphere was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Yet every sound seemed magnified. The rustle of footwear, the faint click of badges, the hushed murmurs of onlookers. "Dispatch, confirm credentials," Reynolds reiterated, attempting to reassert control. Marcus remained placid, repeating his directive to verify directly with federal records. His words were precise, professional, and unflappable, a stark contrast to Reynolds' increasingly anxious disposition. One of the accompanying officers leaned slightly closer to Reynolds. Sir, perhaps we should verify before resorting to protocol, Reynolds interrupted, his voice rising just enough to attract attention. We will handle this my way initially. However, the involuntary twitch in his hand, the way his eyes darted between the ID and the dispatcher's radio, betrayed a burgeoning realization that this stop might be exceeding his purview. The camera captured a fleeting expression on Marcus's face, a mixture of patience and quiet authority. He displayed no anger, no defensiveness. He simply understood the potential ramifications should officers continue to operate based on assumption rather than factual evidence. One misstep here, he knew, could carry significant consequences for all involved. Minutes elapsed. Dispatch responded, their voice filtering through the radio. Officer Reynolds, please confirm the basis for this stop. The identification has been flagged as a federal credential. Verification is pending. Reynolds faltered. He possessed no immediate explanation. His ingrained assumptions, long cultivated by prior detentions of young black men for minor infractions, were on the verge of confronting reality. The backup officers exchanged glances, sensing a shift in the stakes. Marcus spoke again, his tone calm but resolute. Officer Reynolds, I strongly advise you to verify my credentials directly with federal records. This will provide immediate confirmation. The air seemed to grow heavier, charged with unspoken anticipation. Employees in nearby vehicles observed in silence. Even the janitor paused mid-stride, casting a glance over his shoulder. On camera, every element served as a testament to authority clashing with prejudice. Reynolds' tightening jaw, Marcus's unwavering composure, and the subtle readjustment of the backup officers' stances as they weighed the legitimacy of the stop. Reynolds swallowed audibly. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. The phrase he had repeated almost reflexively, suspicious individual, now felt inadequate, almost erroneous. The dispatcher's voice returned, calm and neutral. Officer Reynolds, you are authorized to verify credentials. Please report your findings without delay. Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly, his tranquil demeanor now serving as a silent assertion of control over a situation that could have devolved into confrontation, or worse. Reynolds' chest tightened as he processed the unfolding reality. The man he had categorized as suspicious was not merely legitimate. He was an authority figure whom few local officers would ever have occasion to engage with. The body camera meticulously documented every detail. The attentive postures, the subtle gestures, the facial expressions, and the faint, ambient hum of normal life continuing around them. A routine parking lot inquiry had transformed into a standoff between perception and reality, bias and professionalism, instinct and experience, and in that crucial moment, all parties involved understood that the stop had only just begun, and its resolution would determine whether authority, prejudice, or truth would ultimately prevail. The backup officers stood a few paces behind Reynolds, their gazes shifting nervously between him and Marcus Bennett. Reynolds' jaw was set, his fingers twitched near the radio, and his posture was defensive. He had been absolutely certain of his initial assessment until this juncture. Something in Marcus's calm demeanor, his precise movements, and the palpable authority he exuded caused the officer to hesitate. "Sir, we still require confirmation of your credentials," Reynolds stated, attempting to regain command. His voice lacked the sharp certainty it had possessed earlier. Marcus lifted his ID slightly, maintaining a steady tone. "Officer, I have provided all necessary documentation. I am fully authorized to be present. If you contact your dispatcher or federal records, you will confirm this immediately." One of the backup officers, Davis, glanced at Reynolds with a subtle expression of doubt. "He seems legitimate. Perhaps we should just—" Reynolds interrupted curtly, a flicker of defensiveness in his eyes. "Follow procedure. I am in charge here." Marcus remained unperturbed. Instead, he began walking slowly towards the building, his hands visible, deliberately maintaining his composure. His gait was calm, unthreatening, yet imbued with an undeniable authority, a clear signal that he was not an individual to be intimidated. Dispatch crackled over the radio once more. "Officer Reynolds, we require clarification. The individual claims to be an FBI instructor. Verify immediately." Reynolds hesitated. His internal narrative, a decade of instinct-driven stops, clashed with the stark reality that he had detained someone whose credentials were unassailable. Marcus had provided him with the facts. It was Reynolds's bias and assumptions that had escalated the situation. A shadow of unease crossed Reynolds's face as he glanced at his backup officers. They shifted uncomfortably, sensing the miscalculation. One officer muttered, "Sir, perhaps we should just—" But Reynolds's pride prevented him from conceding entirely. Marcus's continued calm, however, left no room for ambiguity. "Officer Reynolds, I recommend you verify my credentials at this moment. You will find everything in order." Reynolds's hand moved toward the radio again, fumbling slightly as he relayed the information to dispatch. The body camera captured every second. The subtle shift in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, the nervous glance toward the backup officers, and Marcus's unyielding composure. Within minutes, a dispatcher's voice came through clearly. "Officer Reynolds, verification confirmed. The individual is an FBI instructor authorized to be on site. Please advise next steps." The words struck Reynolds with the force of a cold wave. He froze, the radio still clutched in his hand. For the first time during the encounter, reality pierced through the lens of his prejudice. The man he had labeled as suspicious was not merely legitimate. He was an individual possessing authority and experience far beyond what Reynolds had anticipated. Marcus did not raise his voice, nor did he gloat. He simply nodded, allowing the information to speak for itself. "Officer Reynolds, as you can observe, everything checks out. I trust this resolves any concerns." The camera captured the ensuing silence, the subtle relief evident on the faces of the backup officers, the lingering tension in Reynolds' posture, and the quiet hum of the parking lot gradually returning to its normal rhythm around them. The body camera's angle precisely captured every detail. The bead of sweat on Reynolds' brow, the steady gaze of Marcus, and the ambient sounds of the parking lot regaining its usual ambience. Reynolds exhaled slowly, the realization finally settling in. He had acted on assumption, allowing bias to dictate his actions. Marcus, conversely, had maintained his composure, exhibiting professionalism and an unyielding demeanor, demonstrating precisely the authority and knowledge that Reynolds' suspicion had sought to dismiss. "Dispatch. No further action required," Reynolds mumbled, his tone subdued. The radio clicked off, and a palpable weight seemed to lift from the scene, though the embarrassment and internal reckoning for the officer were only just beginning. Marcus adjusted his briefcase and commenced walking toward the contractor's office. "Thank you for your cooperation," he stated quietly, a subtle yet firm reminder that while he had remained composed, he had every right to expect professionalism in return. The backup officers exchanged glances, their relief mingled with a sense of unease. They had personally witnessed how swiftly a routine stop could escalate due to assumption and prejudice. The body camera footage would later serve as an unequivocal record. Every misjudgment, every subtle indication of bias, and the moment authority was quietly but undeniably asserted by Marcus. Even as Marcus disappeared into the building, Reynolds remained, his gaze fixed on the ID that had precipitated so much unnecessary tension. The encounter would not be easily forgotten. Internal reflection, potential complaints, and a thorough review of his actions loomed on the horizon. The officer had encountered a rare confrontation with reality, one that would prove difficult to reconcile with years of instinct-driven judgments. And in the recesses of his mind, Reynolds understood that this incident would not remain a private matter. It had been recorded, documented, and would soon be scrutinized by superiors, colleagues, and the public at large. A single, simplistic assumption, deeply rooted in bias, had nearly culminated in a career-defining error. The body camera footage narrated a story that extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. A lesson in authority, composure, and the stark consequences of allowing prejudice to dictate one's actions. By the conclusion of the encounter, it was unequivocally clear that what had commenced as a routine stop had evolved into an undeniable lesson in accountability and professionalism, one that would resonate far beyond the quiet corporate park in Arlington. The confirmation from dispatch hung in the air like a weighty shroud. Officer Reynolds' hand lowered slowly from the radio, and for the first time he seemed fully cognizant of the gravity of his error. The individual he had labeled as suspicious was not merely a federal employee. He was Marcus Bennett, an FBI instructor with years of experience training law enforcement officers across the nation. Marcus continued toward the contractor's office with measured steps, his posture unwavering. Every movement exuded authority and composure, yet Reynolds could feel the oppressive weight of the moment. He had permitted bias to guide his actions, creating a situation that possessed the potential for significant escalation. The body camera captured the palpable tension, the silent acknowledgement of his mistake, and the subtle relief flickering across the faces of the backup officers. "Dispatch. No further action needed," Reynolds murmured, almost as a reflex, though the words now sounded hollow. He met Marcus's gaze briefly, but without animosity. "I appreciate your cooperation," Marcus stated, his tone firm yet courteous, serving as a reminder that professionalism could command respect even when confronted with prejudice. The backup officers exhaled in unison. Davis, the younger patrolman, shook his head slightly. "I can't fathom why he deemed him suspicious. He's literally an FBI instructor," he remarked quietly. The others remained silent, understanding that this encounter would likely be a subject of review and discussion for months to come. Reynolds' body language shifted, his shoulders tense, his jaw tight. He replayed the preceding moments in his mind. The instant he first saw Marcus, the assumptions he made, his insistent demand for verification, all of which would have been unnecessary had he approached the situation without prejudice. Even the minute expressions captured on the body camera told the story of a misjudgment deeply rooted in racial profiling. Nearby employees and passers-by had begun to resume their daily activities. Some curious glances were still cast toward the now empty space where Marcus had stood moments before. On camera, the scene depicted the ordinary world continuing unabated, seemingly oblivious to the lesson unfolding in the parking lot, a collision of authority, assumption, and professionalism in real time. Reynolds' thoughts drifted to the potential consequences. Complaints, internal reviews, and possibly disciplinary action could follow. He had been abruptly and publicly reminded that assumptions based on race or superficial appearances were not only unfair, but could result in career-altering mistakes. Marcus continued toward the office building with a steady gait, his briefcase in hand. He had navigated the situation flawlessly, calm, composed, authoritative, and entirely in control, without unnecessarily escalating tensions. His tranquil demeanor had diffused what could have become a tense confrontation and demonstrated the power of professionalism over prejudice. The visual record from the body-worn camera would later be disseminated throughout the precinct, serving as a stark illustration of the repercussions stemming from discriminatory profiling. Every sidelong look, every subtle movement, every strained moment meticulously documented the clash between ingrained prejudice and verifiable reality. Supervisors reviewing the incident would acknowledge Reynolds' decision to halt the vehicle, driven by preconceived notions, his swift realization of the error, and the composed demeanor Marcus maintained throughout the entire event. It represented a silent triumph for integrity, responsibility, and judicious authority. Marcus's conduct had transformed what could have escalated into a combustible confrontation into an instructive episode on self-control, competence, and due regard for official documentation. For Reynolds, it served as a sobering admonition. One must never permit subjective impressions to supersede objective evidence, nor allow preconceived notions to undermine professional conduct. As Marcus departed the premises, the final frames captured by his body camera depicted the lingering discomfort. Reynolds standing motionless, his colleagues exchanging uncertain glances, and the subtle ambient sounds of administrative activity gradually reasserting themselves. The overarching message was undeniable. This encounter transcended mere identification protocols. It spoke to the insidious nature of assumptions, the corrosive effects of racial prejudice, and the critical imperative to approach every interaction with diligence and professional integrity. Even after Marcus was no longer visible, the resonance of the incident persisted. Reynolds would retain the memory of this stop, a perpetual reminder of how readily bias can distort perception. The body camera footage guaranteed that accountability and openness would be upheld, providing a valuable case study for both law enforcement personnel and the general public. The parking area had returned to its usual tranquility, but the narrative had already etched its significance. Every individual who reviewed the footage, every onlooker, would bear witness to the collision between prejudice and lawful authority, the stark disparity between conjecture and established fact, and the irrefutable confirmation of Marcus's identity. What commenced as a standard roadside stop had evolved into a powerful demonstration of professional conduct, triumphing over discriminatory attitudes. If you are of the conviction that competence and accountability should invariably hold greater weight than bias, please consider subscribing and activating the notification alerts. This narrative is but one instance within a world replete with valuable lessons awaiting discovery.